We're excited to have you here because we've been studying a part of your history and Harvard's history for the last going on now 11 weeks. And you're a major part of that early period at Harvard studying psychedelics. I thought I'd jump into our first question, and I gave you a little preview of what I wanted to start with. And it really starts with the person of Timothy Leary.
Well, I'm happy to. Timothy, I was assigned to Timothy. He was my faculty advisor. I didn't know who he was. As an undergraduate at Kenyon College, I majored in psychology and philosophy. I didn't have a lot of exposure to the type of research that Tim was noted for in the field of psychology, which was personality assessment. So when I came to Harvard in 1960, in the fall, at 5 Divinity Avenue, which I didn't recognize at the time was probably a bit of an omen, if you will. But anyway, I had this meeting with him in what had been a converted utility closet, because it turned out he really didn't want to be. He wanted to be closer to the students and closer to maybe to the front door of the building. But I found him to be very present, very charming, very intelligent. A really good listener. He was very engaging, and he said to me at the very beginning, "I want you to know something, Gunther. That this past summer, I was in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and he told me the story of taking the mushrooms there and his experience, and that it was quoted publicly as saying, 'I learned more about psychology in that 5-hour session than I did in all my professional years.' And he said, 'That's what I'm interested in now.' And then I met Richard Alpert, aka Ramdas, in that same short period. And again, I found him to be very, very charming, very intelligent also, and very warm. He had more of an emotional, I would say at this point, from my current perspective, more of an emotional center than the excitement, the curiosity, the sense of being on the cutting edge of research in human consciousness. Particularly, again, as I said a few moments ago, about as we started doing readings and things, historical readings and different spiritual texts and so on, and we began to see that we were part of a larger fabric, if you will. When introducing that into Western psychology, a tremendous amount of excitement earlier, and there was a sense of being part of something that was really significant. The citadel of Western rationality of Harvard University. Here is this movement towards recognizing non-conceptual awareness as an important field of study of consciousness of human beings, and the role of non-conceptual awareness. What I'm calling here, it can be called many names in different contexts, but what I'm calling here at the moment, in the context we're speaking here, of a non-conceptual awareness, of discovering the importance of that, and how that is the kind of DNA, if you will, for real creativity, for real compassion, for real, for true spirituality, for many different aspects of human potential lie in this capacity, which is for the most part overridden by the conceptual mind and the conceptual brain, and what is called more and more now in neuroscience the kind of default mode network, which is basically the neurological basis of the sense of self, of the ego structure, which gets dissolved temporarily, if you will, through psychedelics. It allows a kind of neuroplasticity to occur for a period of time where the conceptual mind is suspended, if you will, and as I'm saying, this non-conceptual awareness arises and starts to inform many different aspects of human beings. So again, we saw ourselves as part of a historical movement that had every capacity to impact human life. And bear in mind, this is the early 60s, so you have the Vietnam War, you have the beginning of the women's movement, these revolutionary and evolutionary movements that are happening, and what we're doing at Harvard there, and also what was happening on the West Coast in a parallel fashion at SRI, at Stanford Research. And, I'm not talking about Ken Kesey right now. I'm talking about other people on the West Coast that were exploring also in their own way with more of a therapeutic focus than we had. But anyway, this was the zeitgeist of the time. Let's say from a Vedic perspective of the dance of Shiva, the goddess of creation and destruction. She's dancing harder than ever. And with all of the turmoil, all of the chaos that we're experiencing right now, there is also an evolutionary movement arising here that is opening up a level of spiritual understanding and compassion that I believe is parallel to the involutionary movement that's happening. So these things always happen together. The time, it may not be so visible, the timing may be a little bit, because one thing may be an ascendant at a little bit more at a certain point, but I'm seeing over the years from my current perspective, more and more interest in opening up human potential in healing and in getting past the kind of classic patriarchal and, kind of warlike mentality, if you will, the violence and the conflict, the competition. I think there's a growing sense that we got to go beyond this, basically, if we're going to survive. I remember once, for example, given my Holocaust background, I had a reliving of a Holocaust experience, including the ovens, all of it, and I was so shaken by that. I went up to Tim after the session. I described what was. I was still impacted by the session coming down, but I was able to speak, and I shared with him what had happened in that session. And he looked at me and he kind of smiled, and he said to me, he shook his head, and said, "Gunther, I've been on both sides of the gun, all those roles." So that's a different level of understanding. That doesn't come through a microdose or through a magic pill, if you will. Well, as you could imagine, those early experiences opened me up to a variety of influences. As I said earlier, we were doing a lot of reading in different traditions and discovering, for example, in the classical Greek mysteries, and certainly in the Latin, South American cultures, and including the Celtic tradition, many traditions. All of them actually seem to have at some point or there's some dimension of the psychedelic awakening, if you will, or some kind of possibility. So I had a session at Concord Prison where I was working with a convict, an Irish mafioso convict, Jimmy Kerrigan. His brother, John Kerrigan, was on death row in Walpole. And Jimmy and his brother John had been criminals almost their whole life, from childhood on, had been incarcerated many times. And these guys were violent criminals. I think they could have easily been hitmen. They could have, played multiple roles in criminality. So he was one of the volunteers in the program. And we had cots in the room, and we did our best, for example, in terms of the setting. We tried to bring in, this was in the hospital ward of the Concord prison, which is at the back of the prison and through the courtyard in a lockdown area. It's a hospital ward, if you will. And we were locked in there from 8:30 in the morning till about 5 in the afternoon with a guard at the door, on the outer door. And, with 12 convicts, if you will, 8 to 10 to 12 convicts at different times. And so we brought in Indian prints and we brought in some incense. The incense lasted about 5 minutes before the guard knocked on the door and told us, because they thought we were smoking pot in the room or something. I don't know. So, but we were able to maintain the Indian prints. So we had a semblance of setting, but we had to kind of override the setting with our own set, our own expectation, if you will, our own presence, awareness. So I'm sitting there working with Jimmy Kerrigan on the bed. And his eyes are shut and he's catatonic. He's not moving. He's not responding to anything I'm doing. And I'm a pretty good guide, I'm pretty experienced. So I wasn't pushing myself on him, but I saw how, he was rigid, holding himself rigid, and really not just laying there quietly, but there was a rigidity. I saw a lot of suffering there. And so I was doing my best to facilitate some healing. And he just wouldn't respond to me. So I finally just gave up, and then I went to work with someone else. So 2 weeks later, we we reconvened because that was our pattern. We would do one session. 2 weeks later, we'd come back and do a debrief, a shorter debrief. We went there the whole 5 or 6 hours, and I was debriefing with him. And at that point, he was lucid. He was a bit carefree. He was joyful, interacting with me, and he shared with me what he was experiencing. And he said to me, Gunther, I went into what the Tibetans would call a bardo state, a state of a delusionary, hallucinatory state in which I felt that you guys were giving me a truth serum. You were giving us like a sodium pentothal or something like that, and we're trying to find out the crimes that I had committed, I hadn't been busted for, and I was planning to have you executed. I was thinking some remarkable experiences at the level of, of being to being, of a heart connection with people outside of their economic, social, political roles, if you will. In this case, the role of the convict and the Harvard professor or graduate student. Those roles dissolved in those 5 hours, basically. And, again, I think the oracular prophetic traditions are really important. They were really important to us early on in our research, informing how the whole idea of set and setting came out of indigenous cultures, basically. Jim's phrasing, set and setting, which is still used now, and he invented the phrase and the orientation, even more than the phrase, that came out of basically indigenous cultures. Where, for example, the use of psychedelics was always predicated on a ritual, on a timing, astronomically, astrologically. Was designed with very specific outcomes in mind. So having that knowledge and wisdom really informed our work earlier. I think there's certainly a residual that's happening now because set and setting is recognized. People really don't attribute it to him, but he created the phrase. But we're the first to acknowledge where it came from, as I said a moment ago. So how to bring that in?